Good morning. Great. You're all wide awake. Nobody was in the casino last night, right? While we set up and while we plug in, first I want to thank you all for joining us. I know there are lots of distractions here in Las Vegas. I've read about some of them on the internet. My background is doing survey research in an effort to understand who is here and who some of our panelists are likely to inform or possibly offend. I want to do some quick polling about our audience, recognizing the audience is fluid because we'll have folks coming in and out all day. If you go out and come back, please don't take 2 bags. So to begin, how many of you have a full-time affiliation with a college or university? And keep your hands up. And of those of you with a full-time affiliation, how many of you are faculty, primarily faculty? How many of you primarily administrators? How many of you have a part-time affiliation with a college or university? How many of you work in K-12? How many of you would define yourself on your tax forms as being part of the IT industry? You are a technology provider. Some of you are putting 2 hands up. You are a provider of products, goods, services. How many of you are here on an expense account from your nonprofit institution? We are not taking pictures. And how many of you did well on the tables last night? Great. All right. That just sort of helps put things in context. Thank you. We're going to get our panel mic'd, and I'm going to try to set a little bit of context while we get going here. Again, thank you all for joining us. The title of this session is, if we can switch to the podium slides, is college obsolete? How many of you believe college is obsolete? How many of you who believe college is obsolete work in higher ed? Thank you. All right. Good, sir. Can we switch? Thank you. Put on my graphics. See how you like my graphics compared to the other graphics. So higher ed is widely seen and criticized as being conservative, staid, and static. And yet, historically, there's another perspective on this, that we know the history of American higher education over 380 years from the founding of Harvard is very much an experience of barbarians at the gate. An established order views the new entrants as barbarians of the gate. That's true of the colonial colleges against one another because they all had religious affiliations, the emergence of public institutions, and later the land-grant colleges. During the Civil War with the Morrill Act, the founding of Joliet Community College a century ago as the first community college, the expanded access and franchise, the emergence or the arrival of adults, beginning with the GI Bill at the end of the Second World War, and it was certainly adults who saved higher education from the demographic downturn of the 1980s in terms of helping to sustain enrollments, the emergence of for-profits, and now the emergence of online. So there is a dynamic process. It's a painful one. The established order often doesn't like it. We're going to talk a little bit about some of that. Again, this is our panelists. The case about college being obsolete is not a new one. Some of you with gray or thinning hair may remember Carolyn Byrd's tract, Rant, 1975, The Case Against College, at a time of an economic downturn and cab driving PhDs in New York, and much of the same economic dislocation we have experienced during each downturn when college graduates have a problem getting jobs. The DIY movement could also be seen as sort of a 40-year update on that, many similarities. We should give homage to Peter Drucker, a college professor, who in 1997, in one of his last interviews, said universities won't survive. Education is in deep crisis. Of course, those of you who know higher education well know we are always in deep crisis. If you substitute satellite for stream, we're already beginning to deliver more lectures on campus via satellite, all kinds of stuff. The college campus won't survive. College buildings are hopelessly unsuited and totally unneeded. He was not talking about the fact that there's a lot of concrete and it's hard to put signal through that. He was talking about that as a teaching experience, and this comes from Drucker, who spent his adult career in high-touch institutions, initially Bennington when he migrated to the United States ahead of the Second World War, later at NYU, and finally at the Claremont Graduate Universities. We talk about truly transformative technology. We're coming up on the 30th anniversary of the arrival of the Mac. Steve Jobs stood on the stage at De Anza Community College across from the Apple campus, pulled the Mac out of the bag. How many of you remember that? How many of you weren't born in 1984 but think it was a great idea? in terms of setting things forward, and yet you seem to be having a recurring conversation about technology. The subject of the sentence, for those of you who remember sentence diagramming, has remained the same. How do we get faculty to? And then the object varies from how do we get them to use computers, to use digital stuff, to do all, the underlying issues in terms of user support, infrastructure remains very similar. And there is the issue of the MOOCs, which have captured a lot of the imagination, a lot of the attention. It's a public policy issue in many states. Here in California, where I live and where some of you are, the governor has come out for this. Many would say that the MOOCs are following the classic Gartner hype cycle of rising expectations, great aspirations, some inflated. We get a trough of disillusionment. We're seeing a little bit of that. Each of the three major MOOC providers has pulled back in the last 3 months on some of their initial objectives. Udacity has said it's going to look at some other markets other than higher education. I think EDX has said their efforts to link course takers with employers has not been as successful as initially anticipated. Coursera seems to be parsing data about motivation to redefine retention rates. And we're slope of integration moving towards hybrid, great numbers, and other kinds of things that are part of it. So we're going to sort of parse this question about, is college obsolete, with our panels. I'm going to briefly introduce our panel members. I'm not going to do long introductions. Their degrees are impressive. Their accomplishments would leave your parents all asking, why haven't you done that? To my immediate left and your right, and that's a physical, it's not a geopolitical statement. I begin with Robin Goldberg, who is the Chief Marketing Officer of the Minerva Project. Robin. Next to Robin is Burke Smith, who's the CEO and founder of Straighterline. In the middle, again, it's geographic, not geopolitical. Allison Barber, who's the Chancellor of Western Governors University, Indiana. Next to Allison is Karen Francis, the CEO of AcademixDirect. And finally, Brian Whitmer, who you met earlier, who is a co-founder of Instructure, one of the primary, leading LMS providers to higher ed. So we're going to fondle the elephant. This is the research methodology none of us learn in graduate school, but deals with real life in terms of how we touch the elephant. I'm sorry. I want to be careful. I don't want to get in trouble with certain audiences. We're going to touch different parts of the elephant to kind of bring the gestalt of this question. And Allison, I want to begin with you. We're going to, in terms of is college obsolete, Western Governors University is a very different approach to the world. Not credits, but competency.
Right.
Launched with great fanfare during, but not necessarily part of the .com.edu era a decade or so ago. Currently, across the various WGU campuses, some 40,000 students are taking and completing competency-based courses. You're a leading provider of MBAs, I believe, in Indiana, among the 5 states, behind Notre Dame, Indiana State, and a couple of others. So aside from the experience of your students, as we look at is college obsolete or obsolete for whom, what is the WGU experience about competency say to the rest? And how will that cast a shadow, or is it casting a shadow, for more conventional parts of higher education?
Well, I think absolutely it's changing the way people look at higher education. And first of all, it changes the way students look at higher education and the opportunity. You know, WGU...
Let's be clear, some students. Your modal
Sure.
student is not an 18-year-old in a dorm, primarily adults, primarily part-time, largely working.
Right, that's right. Our average age student's 37. They are working full-time. They've tried college at some point, so our typical student has had some college credit. And then they realize that, you know, there are 37 million Americans who started college, but for some reason didn't complete that bachelor's degree. And then there's another population of citizens who need that master's degree to be competitive in the marketplace. And so that's really our niche, are the adults who are looking to finish that bachelor's or move forward with their master's degree. And when WGU started 16 years ago, you know, we really invented this whole space of competency-based education. And we said to ourselves, well, gosh, what if we play to our students' strengths? Instead of making them sit through a semester of class where they're already competent in that topic, what if we measure their learning instead of time? And so we were really excited about our founders' vision as they crafted out this new approach to higher ed that is based on competencies. And once you demonstrate a competency, you move to your next course. And so why wouldn't we energize adults to complete their degree as quickly as possible so that they can be competitive in the marketplace? That has yielded great success for our university, 30,000 alums now across the country, students in all 50 states. But what we're really excited about, and I'm thrilled that so many of you are here today because it gives me great hope for the future of higher ed and the transformation that is happening and really needs to continue to happen, is that we're sharing the model and we're watching other universities really cling to what this competency-based education is. And so just recently we passed legislation in Washington last year that allows universities to pilot competency-based education and not have to go through all of the barriers and all the hurdles that you might imagine we did 16 years ago when, you know, our university launched the same year Yahoo launched. So people were really uncertain about online education. And we see that when you talk about it as college obsolete, you know, our answer is, gosh, we sure hope so. We hope the old model is obsolete, because how tragic would it be if we didn't leverage all of the wonderful technology and all of the resources we have as a country into the space of education. We talk about if you fell into a coma 100 years ago in a hospital. 100 years ago, if you dropped into a coma in a hospital and you woke up today in that same hospital, nothing would look the same. If you drop into that same coma at a college campus. So we're excited about the transformation, and we hope a lot of things are obsolete in traditional ed.
I need to push you. How soon before competency goes from WGU Indiana to Indiana University Bloomington?
Yeah, gosh, it's happening. You know, we're already working with several foundations. The Gates Foundation is funding competency programs for universities. We open the doors at WGU probably 2 or 3 times a year and invite universities to come in and see what we're doing.
I want to know when the
happening.
undergraduate calculus class or bio class or the large service courses in Bloomington move to competency as opposed to credits, and what that does to faculty culture.
Well, that's a different question.
Yeah.
Sure, that's a good question. You know, the faculty members look at that and say, "Boy, is this compromising my textbook? Is it compromising my style of teaching?" Yeah. But boy, we're just excited about the success we've seen in other universities who are bold enough to say, let's put our toe in the water and try it. And they're trying it in pilot programs.
Okay. 3 years, 5 years, no years?
For that to happen at IU?
At IU?
Well, I think in certain degree programs it's starting to happen. I think it's 3 years away, and I think it's, you know, sooner if people really focus on the benefit that is to the student.
Robin, you're at the other end. Minerva launched with great fanfare. Clearly you're going after a very unique, many would argue elite students who would be just fine on their own, offering them a different path to an elite college experience. You're going to start small, you're going to scale large. It's a very different structure of a college experience in terms of active learning, residential, not in one place, but campuses across the course of the experience. Flip side of that question, when will the Minerva experience, and how will the Minerva experience, given that you have yet to admit your first students, when will that begin to spill over in terms of changing the culture and having an impact on other kinds of institutions? Well, let me ask first of all, how many of you are familiar with Minerva? So maybe a quick 15-word, if possible, description of Minerva.
Sure. We are launching a new undergraduate university experience to prepare global leaders and innovators, and we're doing that in a real global context. So there is a very deliberate curriculum to help prepare these students to think about the problems of the world and how do we solve them. And doing that, as Casey said, in a residential way where they will have an opportunity to live in up to 7 different urban settings during the course of their 4 years. So it's a very, very different model. The question is, do we hope people start to adopt it? Well, when I tell you what our core promise is, and that is an unbelievable high-quality education for a fraction of the cost, we hope a lot of people start to adopt it. So, you know, we spend a lot of time thinking about the students. How do we prepare the students? What are the types of things that we need to give them in terms of skill sets? And how do we deliberately develop a curriculum to do that? So if you look at a lot of universities, if you go in as a freshman, as a sophomore, you take a whole survey of courses and you get a little bit of exposure to things, but do you really learn how to critically question? Do you learn ways to think and analyze? Do you think about how to creatively approach a new problem? Do you learn effective communication skills? These are all things we believe students need to be great leaders. So we are deliberately developing those skills as a foundation, teaching foundational concepts, habits of mind, and that will be the building blocks. So we hope that other universities
you're building a
adopt some of that.
competency-based education that's different, in some ways similar to Western Governors University, but with a slightly different focus and a very different clientele.
It's a very different clientele, and yes, the idea is that they become very competent as thinkers, because we know that's what employers are looking for. So proof, the research shows that as we talk to any kind of employers, they're looking for great thinkers, and that's the type of students we want to help develop.
But you're going to have a small number of those great thinkers through Minerva.
Well, the number will grow over time, and then we hope that others will start to look at our models and start to adopt that. I mean, let me give one other example, and that is, it builds on the conversation earlier today around the MOOCs. There is a lot of wonderful introductory content out there. So we want our students to have access to all of that. We don't think they should be paying tuition dollars for that, right? So we want students to get that introductory content, use all of the assets that are out there, all the content that's available today. When you come to class, when you're paying tuition, small, interactive classes where you're really applying that knowledge versus just information dissemination.
Okay. You've given me a segue to go to Brian. So Brian, morning. Instructure is not a MOOC provider as such, or an LMS provider, but you do have a platform that many are using for MOOCs. Let's poll our audience. How many of you think MOOCs are the greatest thing since guaranteed student loans? Pell Grants? Lowering the drinking age in your state or not? How many of you think MOOCs are the bane of higher education and the high-touch experience? How many of you are just a bit perplexed and wondering how this is all going to play out? That should get a lot of hands. All right, so let's talk about MOOCs. A lot of public conversation, a lot of campus conversation. You guys have had an incredible experience in terms of the zombie course with one of your campuses. But there's still a lot of ambiguity. I mean, some would argue that MOOCs are at this point, despite all the hoopla, it's sort of like DOS 1.0, decidedly different but still in a process of evolution in terms of infrastructure, learning, technologies, access to different groups, depending on how you view the MOOCs. Do they serve, as our questioner asked, only already a well-educated population that's been through college? Does it work for folks who don't have a series of prerequisites? Where are we going with the MOOCs? Where will MOOCs be? And what do your campus clients want MOOCs to be? And how do they, is it really just sort of this transition into hybrid? Are we going to find, it looks like they're just sort of one point on the continuum of online education, but there's a lot of movement.
I mean, when you look at MOOCs, so when MOOCs first started to get an exciting thing, right? Yeah. There was this idea of courses for the whole world to take. We actually got really excited in Instructure. Some of our customers want to do it with us, and we do have a MOOC initiative, the Canvas Network, that we push forward. But I was really excited because I wanted to see how people were going to experiment with this new massive online model. And I was a little disappointed, to be frank, with how quickly we converged on this idea of we're going to take the lecture and quiz model of teaching and we're just going to throw it online and give it to everyone in the world. And so we've been harping a long time on the idea that let's continue to experiment. Like let's push the boundaries and let's say, what if we have different teaching models, more collaborative teaching models? And what do we do when we, for example, pull in a pop culture reference into the course? What do we do when we vary enrollment sizes? We have thousands of students or hundreds of students, and trying to push those limits. And there wasn't a lot of talk about that at the time. I feel like it's starting to get there now as we're, like you said, starting to hit that trough of disillusionment. Everybody's backing up and saying, oh wait, maybe this isn't going to replace all of the universities. Maybe we're not going to have just 10 universities, right, 5 years from now. Maybe we actually will have a bunch of institutions still around. But everybody's now stepping back and saying, this is an experiment, and let's try, and let's vary our variables a little bit and see what happens. And you saw, I thought, Anant with edX, they're doing a great job of that, and the dialogue has very clearly changed in the last little while.
But it seems to me that one of the key issues for MOOCs, and I'm thinking now about a New Yorker article, Laptop U, that published in June, that actually profiled a classics Harvard prof, teaches classics, teaches the Heroes course, Greek mythology, Greek and Roman mythology, and the experience of taking that course out. A huge investment in infrastructure, a huge investment of repositioning course materials. As I recall, he actually sent out a call to former students to act as TAs, so that there wasn't kind of an ad hoc infrastructure that might have been dependent upon the goodwill of students, but to provide the kind of infrastructure we get with more conventional courses. Is infrastructure the essence of the success of MOOCs?
It's all over the place, right? I mean, some of the most successful MOOCs, if you look at the original MOOCs, the connectivist MOOCs, there was no infrastructure, right? That was community more than it was instruction. And so we need to keep trying new things, right? We need to be experimenting and pushing those limits, and I'm glad that we're to the point now where people accept that. You look at Sebastian Thrun and Udacity and the direction they're going with some more of the corporate focus. edX is trying some new things, which I think is really great. And we just need to keep trying new approaches. I feel like we still don't know what a good online course should be, right?
So when will we know?
I don't know. We need to try different things. I feel like there hasn't been enough experimentation to know that. Because what we've done is we've just copied what happened in the face-to-face course and threw it out to hundreds of thousands of students. And what we need to do instead is keep saying, all right, what is it about the internet that's different, and how can we leverage it? I was talking to Robin a little bit about this last night. How can we use the collaborative, communicative components of the internet, real-time communication even, to improve an educational experience online?
Burke, it seems to me that nature and entrepreneurs abhor a vacuum. You've been a serial entrepreneur in education for a number of years. So the fact that there's parts of the college experience that are obsolete or not doing well actually is an invitation to entrepreneurs in some of these areas. There seems to be a case that there are opportunities for innovation, but culture is a large part of this. In terms of where the opportunities are, where colleges can do better, where third parties can help that process. Is it fair to say we're not as static as we think, or in fact that folks like you and your colleagues and Karen as well, when we talk with Karen in a moment, are actually sort of pushing the boundaries of campuses not being static and doing these kinds of things? Does it come from the outside? Does it come from the inside? How do we deal with issues of culture in this context?
Well, first, who's heard of Straighterline? How many people know Straighterline? So let me do a real quick summary so I don't give out of context. We provide extremely affordable courses, just general education. It's like paying for freshman level courses like a cell phone. We're not allowed to be a college because of the way accreditation works. Instead, we have formal articulation agreements with colleges such that students can transfer their courses from us to that college. So $99 a month, very much like a cell phone plan. You can take a freshman year for as little as $1,300 or pieces of it. So a way to really reduce the cost of education. And a little history, because as Casey said, I've been in this online education space for a while. But in 1999, I started an online tutoring company called Smart Thinking, where we sold tutoring services to colleges. That was part of the irrational exuberance period. And by 2001, the irrational part had come home to roost. And we survived, but barely, and then grew over time. Pearson now owns that company, and it's part of Pearson Tutoring Services. In 2008, we started Straighterline as a division of Smart Thinking, became its own company in 2010. But the same principles that underlie Straighterline also, I think, underlie the MOOCs. I heard someone, a keynote speaker, once say it's one of the future trends are MOOCs and MOOC-like substances. And I think we may be one of the MOOC-like substances, but as early as 2008. So the original premises under which we started, I think, still hold. And I think it goes to the point that the culture and the context in which higher ed exists, the regulatory structure and the subsidies that flow to colleges make it really difficult to change things. It also makes change much slower than we think. And I think we've seen that over the last year, the hype and now the trough of irrational exuberance. But the basic premise, which we started, which still holds, online learning is growing dramatically among colleges who are delivering courses for credit. Over 90% of colleges charge the same or more for online courses than for face-to-face courses, though online courses cost often 90% less to deliver. So in a functioning market, or a market where new competitors could enter easily, people would come in and drive the price down to what it actually costs to deliver an online course.
But I have to stop you for a moment, though, but let's be clear, the cost of delivering a course is not the cost of a course.
Exactly, yes.
There's
Cost and
significant
price.
cost of development, which, as those of you who work in higher education know, typically we do a crappy job of cost accounting.
Yes.
Because faculty time is perceived to be a free good. If I'm teaching a widgets course, the time and the resources I might consume to take that course online sometimes, but not always, walk into an accounting formula in that process.
But even the cost of development, when you amortize across a much larger base, gets smaller than we truly appreciate.
Okay.
I think the MOOCs are great examples of that. So the cost of delivery is much lower, but the price hasn't dropped to correspond to that. So what we did at Straighterline is say, well, what we should be doing is just pricing much lower and create a pathway to credit, which we did. Now, colleges don't really want to award credit for other people's courses. They want to have students take their own courses. So for us, the reason we do have colleges who are partners is we become a marketing channel. But that takes time, it takes negotiations, it takes relationships with colleges. We work closely with Western governors. And for those colleges that do, it becomes new students are going to persist. But it's a hard thing to do. And I would argue that I think some of the changes in the space, the MOOC pivot, if you will, is in large part because this pathway to credit has been much harder to to create than anyone anticipated.
I think the other part of online, Karen, is that there's a sense of we're no longer going to accept the status quo ante on the part of students and, in cases, their parents. Certainly the students at Western Gov are representative of those for whom the status quo ante doesn't work. There's a whole cadre of services. Your firm provides some of that as well, helping people navigate courses, stuff that's out there in terms of having find online programs and other stuff. That seems to be a growing market, that the process of understanding getting to college or going to college or selecting a course increasingly is out of the hands of colleges in many ways. Talk about that for a moment, because that's part of the obsolete culture in one sense.
Yes, and I think it's a really interesting time if you switch the paradigm and think about the customer as the student. I mean, much of what we've been talking about is the university control and what the universities will offer. And think about these three things. Today, students, regardless of age, have more information than they've ever had before about everything, period. There's no denying that. The second is that each of us is used to a much more customized approach to what we buy, right? So I can pick what color I want my cell phone to be. I can pick what kind of shoes I want from Zappos. I'm used to a much more customized approach to everything I do. That wouldn't differ in education. People are getting much more focused on, well, I'm spending all this money and time, what do I want to do with that? And then the last is, think about the access on a college campus. Every smartphone can buy something. You can buy tutoring, you can buy test prep, you can buy courses, you can access free courses from your smartphone. Think about how many purchasing agents that now creates on a college campus. So no longer does the main purchasing person control everything that's going on that campus. So I see what we see happening, and my company, we have Course Talk, which is the largest catalog of online courses and MOOCs. We have over 12,000 courses. We have over 6,000 student-powered reviews. We're really all about letting the student talk about what's working, what they like, which courses are hard, which ones aren't, and giving more power to the student to customize what they're looking for. And when I say student, I actually have a broad definition, because many of our students are actually faculty members who want to learn a new way to express something and teach something that they've been teaching for 10 years, and they want something new and exciting, so they're taking MOOCs to find new ways to do that. We have high school students. We've talked about a lot of the MOOC takers. Our graduate students already have degrees, but increasingly high school students are accessing this capability to help them get curriculum that they don't have access to in their schools. Maybe they want to take Mandarin AP, and they don't have that at their school. How do they do that? And then finally, the college student, again, to what Robin was saying, they don't want to waste their time and money on introductory courses. And so if they can, if you're qualified enough to get into MIT, most likely the introductory stuff you could fly through even before you get there. And so why not do some of that in advance and then get there and really take the, the rock star professors and the stuff that really excites you. And so what we do with Course Talk is let the student and let the client have more choice, and I think we're seeing that a lot. I live in Silicon Valley, work in Silicon Valley. There's been a lot of excitement around ed tech. Some of it will stick, some of it won't, but again, I think the experimentation is what's really exciting right now.
So I want to talk about the stick and what doesn't. We're 40 years into the MAC, 30 years into the MAC this month. Some of you were old enough, some of you actually may have been at those institutions that got those $1,000 MAC student deals in 1984. The campuses that did those deals didn't do it because they hoped to make a lot of money selling heavily discounted Macs to students. They did it out of the power and the potential and the promise of the technology. I think it seems to many of us, perhaps many in the room, many of us who've watched for a long time, that we continue to have the same conversation. Lots of stuff has changed around the core. The infrastructure is obviously much better than it's been. The technologies are much better. You think about what $1,000 bought you for a Mac in 1984 as opposed to what you can buy for $1,000 today in a Mac or a Windows system or a tablet or a smartphone or anything else. That part's the easy part. But the core conversation still seems to be we're having conversations about effective use of technology. How do we get faculty to use this stuff? How do we leverage it? And the underlying part of it also is that the technology enables everything that all of you do today. The French have an expression, the more things change, the more they stay the same. I've been fortunate to spend time in Brazil. My colleagues in Brazil tell me that the Brazilian version of that, and my Portuguese is not very good, is es mujas madame. That translates cautiously as only the flies change. Can I say that here? Real quickly, panel, before we go to the audience, how much longer are we going to have these conversations about truly transforming technology or changing the culture and making substantive change? Real quickly, let's start with Robin and we'll go on down.
So just two things real quick. One is that we have to look at technology as how can it enable change versus trying to do the same thing and just replicate it. So taking a lecture and just sticking it online. How do we use technology and think in a completely different way? And the second thing I'd say is we do know a tremendous amount about the science of learning. And how do we leverage technology with those learnings to make it a better learning experience for the students and to get better outcomes? And that's how we have to use technology.
Bert?
So technology doesn't make change. Technology plus new business models makes change. And in the U.S. and maybe even worldwide, the U.S. especially, the business models for universities are pretty set. They are funded by the government, more or less, state or federal, in one way, shape, or form. They are enshrined by accreditation about how a university must look, the organizational structure of a university. So without changing those business models in any kind of dramatic way, there's some change on the margins. You're not going to see a very fast change in the overall economics of the industry. So I think change is coming for sure. The economics are what they are. The price of online courses is so much lower than face-to-face, but it's going to take longer than we think because the business models are enshrined with a lot of political power behind it.
Allison?
Well, to your question, how much longer will we have this conversation? I hope we always have this conversation.
Okay.
Because when we stop having this conversation, we become stagnant. And education, we cannot afford to be stagnant.
Karen?
I'll differ a little bit and say I think it will come faster than you predicted. However, I think it's going to be student-driven. So I guess I would say, how many of you have a 13-year-old child? Can you possibly imagine?
How many of you want to get rid of the 13-year-old child?
Okay.
I don't think it takes them home with you.
Well, okay. They are different. They learn differently. They communicate differently. They are so much more comfortable with technology than even any of us are, and we're all in it every day as our occupation. I think that is going to drive adoption and different methods and different experimentation that as much as the infrastructure will still need to do its infrastructure thing, the students are going to drive more.
I hadn't plans, but I need to interrupt you on that one because I think many of us, K-12 and higher ed, fully understand that while we assume that students, younger people, have these skills, we also know that too many of them have a portfolio that's limited to a GGTT, Google Game, Tweet, and Text. And they can't do the substantive stuff. And it's the substantive stuff that ultimately is going to be part of the portfolio that takes them into a marketplace in the mid part of the 21st century. So I just want to put that as an anchoring statement. Brian is the youngest member of our panel. You know, how long are we going to have these conversations?
How old, Mac?
You remember the Mac launch?
I was
You were there.
born. I was born for that. So just as much as I will say. So as long as we have humans interacting with computers, we will be having this discussion because we are always going to have some kind of frustration with the technology. One of the things that I see happening now that hasn't happened in the past is this heavy emphasis on the user experience. What we need to do, there was a mind shift, right? And it's not like a direct age line, but there's kind of this wavy line of age where some people that are above it get technology and some people that are below it don't get technology, and that, you know, it's not a direct age thing, but there's a line there. And I suspect there will be another one that happens again, and I don't know when that'll happen, but we're going to continue to have this conversation. And what we have to do is, as technologists, we see tech and say, it's awesome, why aren't you using it? And people that are not technologists look at it and they say, I don't care, like I'm just trying to do my job. And get my life in order and not waste a million hours clicking on stupid buttons. And so as we can put more of an emphasis on building things that inherently improve people's lives and save them time and make things easier for them, then they will obviously start to adopt it because it's obvious that they should use it. They'll say, that's something I couldn't do before. So when we built a feature in Canvas called the Speed Grader, which the whole goal of it was just to make the grading process more streamlined. And it's been amazing how much that has driven adoption of the LMS by people who didn't use the technology at all before because they saw other teachers who were cutting their grading time in half, and they said, I want that so bad. And so as we focus on these user experiences and focus more on what are people trying to accomplish and how can we make it obvious that they should use the technology, I think that's what will make the big difference.
Okay, I want to be conscious of time. We have a few moments for some very quick questions from the audience. There are microphones being passed around. I will ask, please identify yourself, your name, and your affiliation. That will allow us to make inappropriate inferences about what you're about to ask as you ask the question. But also, please ask a quick question.
Okay, super. Here you go.
Hi, I'm Marty Kesselman from Rutgers University, and I was on a strategic planning committee at the university on envisioning the future of the university. And some of the big things that came out of that were the importance of critical thinking skills and divergent thinking skills, where students work across boundaries, across disciplines, especially the whole movement of STEM to STEAM, of bringing arts into the sciences. So I've worked with faculty that work with groups of students.
Sir, I need to ask if there's a question. I don't mean to be rude.
Okay, but I'm basically saying I think it's more transforming the culture rather than transformative technology.
Can we all agree that culture is the problem?
I think the culture is the big problem.
Can we all agree?
Sure.
Anybody not agree that there's a culture issue? Okay, next question. Who's got a mic? I can't see you.
Down here.
Who's-
Here we go. I feel like I'm on The Price is Right. Yeah. I've always wanted to be on The Price is Right. My name is Lori Betcher. I am a digital marketing instructor. And my concern with MOOCs, I love the concept. I loved the idea of them. However, my concern is that the concept is further destroying the value of human connection. And I also think that there's so much to say for the classroom experience and what the students gain from each other. How do you see us incorporating those elements into the MOOC experience?
So the question is, can we get to tech-enabled high touch? Is that a fair rephrasing? How do we do tech-enabled high touch? Panel? Ryan?
Talk to Robin. I mean, I was talking to her about this last night because we were having the same discussion. We're like, the human component is a huge part of how we learn. It's that conflict, right? And we were just talking about how they're trying to build technology to actually do that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll address it really quickly and say we are looking at a completely different way to leverage technology for the classroom. So building a different classroom environment that is all small seminar interactive. David Brooks did a piece in the Wall Street Journal not too long ago, and he said everyone's talking about MOOCs. How do you take the lecture and put it online? We're trying to figure out how to take the seminar and put it online because we believe it is critically important that you have that dialogue and interaction. So at Minerva, all classes are very small, faculty-led, interactive discussions, and technology can enable that today. Couldn't do it 10 years
Allison
ago.
and then Karen, you look like you both want to get in on this.
I would just say at WGU, every student is partnered with a faculty member, and they call them every week because we believe in the high-touch piece that supports the high-tech.
And I'll just add, the touch doesn't just have to be between the student and the professor. I mean, increasingly, we all have
Has to be
social-
safe touch.
Well, we have social networks and the ability to connect. And on Course Talk, you can find what did other people who are just like you say about this course. They aren't the best computer programmer. They're just starting. What did they say? And so being able to learn from each other is also a touch component that I think social networks and our ability to think beyond just vertical touch will really grow.
And Bert, we'll give you the last word.
Let me answer just a little differently. So at Straighterline, we have human support both for academic and non-academic support. So we do all that. However, having said that, we need to flip the conversation. So human touch, human help, instructor-led classes are terrific and absolutely necessary for some students. And for those students that want it, that's great. There should be a way to get it, whether through colleges or non-colleges or wherever it is. But some students don't want it. Some students want to move as fast as they can. They just want to get the work done. They want to check the box and move on. They get the credential and move on. For those students, that should be available also. So it's not really an either-or question. It's really a question about pricing. Is that for those who want the more bundled experience, the more service-led experience, it's a higher price. And if you want that, so be it. But the other one, not that the other one is bad, it's just that it serves a different audience.
I'd push on that just a little bit because I think that education is fascinating because it's not actually about giving people exactly what they want. It's about helping them have the experience that they need to have. And to say some people don't want to have a human interaction at all, I think we have to be careful there. I'm not saying that you were saying like that's a terrible idea, but I think that's something we have to be careful about as we talk about technology is people want a streamlined experience where they log in, click a button, get a grade, and get out. And they're missing part of the learning component, or there's a risk of missing part of the learning component if we just let that happen.
Well, let's agree that students always look for the expedient opportunity. And part of our role as faculty members is to provide that appropriate level of dissonance. With that, I'm going to have to end the panel. We've got another group waiting in the wings. My thanks to Allison Barber, Karen Francis, Robin Goldberg, Burke Smith, and Brian Whitmer for an engaging and informative 40 minutes. Thank you all. And thank you, Canvas.
Thank you.